Tarun, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar being organized by Anhad, Act Now for Harmony and Democracy. The topic for today's webinar is Kashmiri Pandits. Can the files heal the wounds? We have with us Dr. Radha Kumar to moderate today's session, but due to technical difficulties, I think she's not here. We have two speakers joined with us. Our first speaker would be Mr. Kapil Kak. Mr. Kapil Kak is a retired officer of Indian Air Force who rose to the rank of Air Vice Marshal. He was the Deputy Director of Center for Air Power Studies. He was awarded Vishisht Seva Medal in 1981. Air Vice Marshal Kapil Kak is one of the many petitioners who have reached to the Supreme Court challenging the J&K Reorganization Bill and the abrogation of Article 370. Our second speaker for the day would be Ashok Kumar Pandeyji. He is a well-known historian, poet, and Hindi author. He has written extensively on the topic that this webinar wants to address today. Two of his books in which he has written on Kashmir are Kashmir Nama and Kashmiri Pandit, which are a must read. I would like to welcome both of you, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Kapil Kak, Air Vice Marshal Kapil Kak, to first address people. Kapilji, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tarun, for those warm few words. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Anhad and, of course, the dynamic Shabnam Hashmi, who's provided me the opportunity to say a few words on the raging narrative of today, last many, many days, Kashmiri Pandits, the K-files, and the question whether K-files will heal the wounds. The answer will come to you in the next 20 minutes. I can think of no better than starting with George Orwell, who many, many moons ago said, in times of universal deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. I can perhaps go even better and take you back to Dante, who said, the darkest place in hell is reserved for those who stay neutral in a moral crisis. K-Files has generated for all of us today a moral crisis. We cannot stay neutral. So here are my truths. K-Files is not all lies. It's not all truth either, but fundamentally an attempt to give a spin to the unfortunate, very deeply saddening and tragic exodus out of Kashmir Valley of Kashmiri Pandits. Everyone here would realize that no one would be affected by this more than me. I may be an air marshal, I may be from the Air Force for a long, long time, but I am at heart, by birth, by schooling, by college, and growth to the stage of being a 17-year-old before I joined the Air Force to fly for it. I'm also a Kashmiri Pandit. So my pain is also huge because my soul has been clawed out from its geocultural moorings in the valley, which goes back a few thousand years, well before Buddhism came in, well before Islam came on the horizon. So you can imagine my pain. But let me be honest and truthful. The film, while without doubt it brings center stage the pain of Kashmiri Pandits, I compliment the directors, the producers, the visualizers, the writers, of bringing forth the dilemma of the Kashmiri Pandits. The truth had to be told. Absolutely no doubt on that. But what the film seeks to do is to vilify, downplay and delegitimize the Kashmiri Muslims, their own pain and suffering, which they have continued to undergo for the last 32 years. There is deafening silence of that. It's highly critical of any non-communal Kashmiri Pandit like me who expresses voice of reason, who in many ways strives for the solidarity of people of Jammu and Kashmir and the entire country, that's India. The thinking and forward-looking individuals all over India see the film as weaponizing the pain and suffering of the Kashmiri Pandits, their memories, and for political, commercial, and possibly electoral consideration. As on date, about 250 crores of rupees is the gross revenue it has generated. And I couldn't agree more with the Chief Minister of Delhi, who said it would be best if the producers and directors are serious about the plight of the Kashmiri Pandits to utilize this amount, at least part of this amount, for the welfare and well-being of the Kashmiri Pandits who are so hugely distraught. No one in this audience here can term the Kashmiri Muslims as terrorists, and that's what this film tends to do. A proud community in that valley, they have been termed as terrorists. They stand brutalized, they stay dehumanized. The entire community. I can understand, yes, every community has bad eggs, and surely Kashmiri Valley too has bad eggs. But what one sees from the wounds that are resulting from the pain of the exodus, these have now been by and large healed. The wounds have dried up. Kashmiris have come to terms with life and moving along. Societally, as individuals, Jammu and Kashmir, the two regions, talking to each other, getting on with life. But here is K-Files actually opening up those wounds, looking at those lacerations all over again and showing them to the people. Over 7 decades, and I want to make this point because Tarun also introduced me as an Air Marshal. I've spent 40 years flying for the Air Force, took part in 1965 and 1971 war, and have been involved and have been steering to research centers dealing with national security, strategy, and defense. From those viewpoints, if I could be allowed to share, if there is one element out of 4 or 5 key components of India's grand strategy, it is national unity, national solidarity, a fellow feeling that can only come out of genuine nationalism and nationhood. What K-Files has done is to strike a devastating blow at that national coherence. That could happen. I do hope that people of India who are very wise will not capitulate and will not fall for the bait of hatred and its spread, which the film is seeking to do, at least in the narrative that is available. A question was posed to me, I think unfortunately Radha is not with us, that what is the impact on Kashmiris? I would say it's even impact on Jammuites which needs to be addressed. It's a very powerful negative impact. Let me explain why. About 10,000 Kashmiri Pandits in the valley, and I've just returned 48 hours ago from both the valley and Jammu, where I've had detailed discussions at ground zero. They feel deeply insecure. I'm talking about the people in the valley, whether Pandits and Muslims. They feel unsafe after release of K-Files. As it is, the killing of that medical shop owner Bindru the principal of the lady principal of a school, a Hindu who was a Sikh, a Hindu teacher who was with her. Their killing had already generated a degree of insecurity amongst the Kashmiris in the valley, as also the Muslims. But what now prevails, thanks to K-Files, is an all-pervasive fear and apprehension about what impact this film would have on future generations of their families. Let me come to Jammu. This region is very complex. In the hills of Punch and Rajouri, it's Paharis versus Gujjars. In the Chenab Valley, that is Doda, Kishtwar, and Badwa, it's between Hindus and Muslims. And the only region which is called the Jammu Tawi catchment region of the Tavi River, which is the districts of Jammu, Udhampur, Samba, and Kathua. This is by and large homogeneous region, which is more right-wing and majoritarian. Yet, I must say that despite the K-Files, the Jammuites are staying very, very mature due to the economic and commercial linkages between the traders, businessmen, and investors in Jammu and the Kashmir Valley. The larger interests of trade and commerce are prevailing over seemingly minor irritants, which was sought to be exacerbated by the film. So there is good news from Jammu. It is for this reason that perhaps despite attempts of super polarization of memories by the K-Files, the common interest between Jammu and Kashmir prevail over any irritants, as I just said. Post 5th August 19, when the 370 article of the Constitution was nullified, the Article 335A was removed in a sense, and humiliatingly for the Kashmiris and in fact Jammuites, that's what they tell us, the division of a state into two union territories, which has never happened in India's independent history. These had already created a certain element of what one would say is disquiet. But that disquiet is now, thanks to the film, increasing somewhat. To me, it is extremely painful to see that Farooq Abdullah, the tall leader of Jammu and Kashmir, head of the conference, and now, more importantly, the head of the People's Alliance for Good Card Declaration, which includes all the mainstream parties of the state, he is shown as having a very close relationship with Yasin Malik. This is factually completely incorrect. Secondly, he's shown as being very pro-Pakistani. Once again, a person who's been perhaps 3 or 4 times the chief minister of India's most sensitive state and who's been a union minister in the cabinet, he's being shown as pro-Pakistani. And I want to give examples. 3 examples are extremely important. The first is 1989, December, the beginnings of the insurgency in the valley. It would be recalled by people present here that Rubaya Saeed was a medical student, was the daughter of the Home Minister of India, Mufti Muhammad Saeed. She was kidnapped by JKLF militants, and they demanded that 5 JKLF leaders be released, and only then would be she allowed to go home. It would surprise many, especially the producers and directors of K-File, who termed Farooq Abdullah a pro-Pakistani and a friend of Yasin, that he most vehemently suggested and recommended as the chief minister to the Union government, including the Prime Minister, that under no circumstances must the JKLF terrorists or militants be released. No harm will come to Dubai. The Union Prime Minister at that time, BP Singh, and who it would be interesting for the gathering here to note, was supported by the Bharatiya Janata Party. He capitulated. He developed nerves, and against the advice of Farooq Abdullah, released the 5 terrorists. And that was the beginning of what I would term this rise of Azadi sentiment in the valley, which played havoc with its security, well-being, and decency of the human beings there. The first one. 10 years later, again an interesting reference, again I quote Farooq Abdullah. IC-814 was hijacked to Kandahar. And Sheikh Farooq Abdullah was told to release dreaded terrorists so that they could be flown to Kandahar, handed over, and the 135 civil passengers could be released. Once again, and this is on record. I'm not privy to any secrets which I'm sharing with the gathering who are present here, that he refused. He said, I will not release them because these are dreaded terrorists and we will pay a very huge price in the years to come if we release them. It would be interesting for people to know one of the terrorists who was compulsorily released from the prison in Jammu and who was airlifted to Kandahar by no less a person than Jaswant Singh, a union minister, escorting those terrorists so that the passengers could be saved. And this was once again completely in opposition to the recommendations of Farooq Abdullah. So I'm just trying to give instances as to how the state has capitulated, and a state which is at a government which is actually supported by the BJP, both in 89 and in 99, it was actually the BJP government headed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So this whole painting of Kashmiri Muslims, every Kashmiri Muslim in the valley is a terrorist, I think it is taking things too far. There's a claim made about Bitta Karate, which is factually right. Bitta Karate was not only on television channels, but on Indian Doordarshan channel, who said, I have with my own hands killed dozens of Kashmiri Pandits. He was in jail, but who released him? Not the state government. It was the government of India. So these are some of the facts, as the Latin proverb says, suggestio falsi, suppressio vini. Suppress the truth and suggest falsehood. Coming to the impact on Kashmiris, let me give a few more instances in somewhat of a detail. As happens in most human situations, shades of grey prevail. There is no doubt, I don't want to, under any circumstances, downplay the role of some sections of the Kashmir Valley people, predominantly of the majority community, who targeted Kashmiri. Undoubtedly, when there is a question-answer session or there are comments, I can give those details, but those fears generated the role initially of JKLF and thereafter by outfits which were encouraged from across the border by the Pakistan Army and the higher side. This led to the generation of apprehensions and total fear amongst the Kashmiri Pandits for them to migrate out and do the exodus. The film is silent on some of the human situations where the same people from the same community, but another section and far larger section, actually kept the keys of the houses of the Kashmiri Pandits. Went to the Kashmiris and Pandits and said, go away for a few months. I'm not able to guarantee my own life. I can't guarantee yours. Help them in the process, in many, many cases financially. I may also give the classical example of two villages right at this moment, Voibog in Pulwama district and Zainpura in Shopian. where Kashmiri Pandits and Muslims live in utmost harmony today. In, and these are approximately 3,000 Kashmiri Pandits who live in 272 locations, north to south, east to west, and live amongst Kashmiri Pandits. They have no security. They are safe. They are secure. Now it is they who have begun to feel a little unsafe after K Files has been released. And that's the impression I get from ground zero. Uh, I also want to mention that I've also said this that um, to describe the Kashmiri uh, from the valley, primarily from the majority community, as inherently violent, barbaric, and devious, and a jihadi to boot, I think it is actually knocking at the foundations of India. I've just earlier said that in terms of India's grand strategy and security, if there is one key element, it is internal coherence. If that internal coherence is dealt a deathly blow, as has been done by K Files, we are in danger. And I do hope that people of India, very wise people, will rise to the occasion and refuse to be misguided into capitulation by the producers. I also want to draw attention to this seeming huge disconnect or disjunction. I'm sorry, disjunction between the majority and the minority community in Kashmir, which has been repeatedly displayed in the film. Actually, that is not the truth. And I go back to a certain built-up tradition of Shaivism and Sufism, which is so inherent to Kashmiri Valley culture. I suggest people may consider researching issues of how Shaivism evolved in Kashmir and how Sufism evolved. It was Shah Hamdan who came from Persia to Kashmir in the 14th century with 700 of his followers who he nominated to occupy various geographies in the valley and become what are now known as peers. It is the same Shah Hamdan who also, to a very interesting situation, I want to share this. Newly converted Hindus became Muslims, of course, and by persuasion and not by sword. And then there was an interesting phenomenon. They used to go to a mosque, do their prayers, and after the mosque, go to the temples. So Shah Hamdan wondered, why is this happening? And that is how you see Islam in Valley has evolved quite differently from Islam's evolution anywhere in the world. There is an expression, Awarde Fatiha, from which comes the concept of Darood Sharif. So you have in mosques in Kashmir even today, Darood Sharif, which is praise of Allah and Quran in Arabic, but in hymns which are Sanskrit. So if you're present there in that mosque, you feel as if bhajans are being sung. That is the culture, 700-year-old culture of the growth and coexistence and development of human beings who belong to two different faiths, Hinduism and Islam. And that survives to this day, despite aberrations in terms of terrorism from across and in some cases from within, because their people are in anger, they're full of hatred, they feel humiliated after 5th of August. They also feel humiliated even before 5th of August because some autonomy which was guaranteed to them under the Constitution of India was progressively diluted. So Article 370 then became just a structure and with no concept in it. Radha had asked me, and I'm glad she's managed to plug into our narrative now. She had asked me, what is the prospect of return of the Kashmiri Pandits and about the related issue of reconciliation. This business of Kashmiri Pandits' return has been on the cards for a long time. So let me give some data. In 2002, there were 2,808 The list is available. Anyone will be directed to that list if they so wish in 2002. That number, as I said earlier, lived in 272 locations all over the valley, in peace and in harmony. Thanks to the efforts of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and I did have a small role as a civil society activist and a track 2 individual in monitoring and pushing the program for Kashmiri Pandits jobs in the valley. 6,000 jobs were promised. In fact, 9,000 were promised by Manmohan Singh. These were monitored, all this happened, and today we have 6,000 of those 9,000 jobs, all thanks to the efforts of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. I may also mention that approximately 14 years out of 32 years have been under the leadership of the ruling dispensation of today. Not one job has been created by the ruling dispensation. So if K-Files needs to go deeper into the problems in Kashmir and solutions thereof, then my suggestion would be, as a civil society worker, that the current ruling dispensation may think about creating the footprint of the Kashmiri Pandit presence in the valley from about 10,000 today, maybe 20,000, maybe 30,000. We have a ruling dispensation which is hugely dynamic in so many other spheres. May I request that they impart a certain degree of dynamism and see that the Pandit footprint goes up. The second point I wish to relate to here on Kashmiri Pandit return and reconciliation is that livelihood and living spaces are linked. It is not that we will hire all the large Indian Air Force transport carriers and have lakhs of people of Kashmiri Pandit origin go back to the valley. What will they do there? So one has to have livelihood. So I've addressed the issue of how our current ruling dispensation can increase the number of jobs. Perhaps persuade private sector investors who are being quoted every day as itching to go and invest in Kashmir, and persuade them that some Kashmiri Pandits be employed legally and through persuasive means. We have had also the question of where will they stay. Approximately 6,000 houses were to be constructed, but we only have about 1,700 today, and these are occupied by Kashmiri Pandits. In some cases, husband is in the valley, the wife is in Jammu. In some cases, the husband is in Jammu and the wife is in the valley, but they're quite happy. Quite a few, quite a large number, I don't have the exact count on this, actually move out of these temporary camps and go to rented accommodation, or in some cases even buy accommodation. I had the opportunity during the recent visit, as I said, I returned from Kashmir only 48 hours ago, to meet with some of these Kashmiri Pandits in camps. There is a fear, post-K-Files, that the kind of security we enjoyed, we have some lingering doubts whether all is going to be well with not only us, but our future generation. But in terms of any fear or apprehension from the majority community, I don't see much, frankly. But there could be some bad eggs in the majority community, waylaid, or persuaded by adversaries to do those acts. So that element of security is also there. There's also a need to do a demographic study in the sense of what are the age groups which will return. Maybe people above 70, like people like me, they would like to relive their nostalgia, their springs, their shrines, their flowers, the changing seasons, the trees, the chinars, their temples. Maybe they will. But somebody who's not even born in 1990, when the trouble started, they have no association with Kashmir. Likewise, the young boys in the Kashmiri Valley have no idea of what is a Kashmiri Pandit other than the ones they see occasionally. So I think in this efforts have been made by organizations. I have been associated with some of these efforts over the last decades and more in getting people from Jammu and people from Kashmir, especially the younger lot, sit together over Kahba, whether you're in Nishat Bagh or in Iqbal Park or wherever, to get to know what the past was all about, that glorious past. And that, in a sense, is societal level reconciliation. It may not actually mean Truth and Reconciliation Commission on South African model, but for that you need a tall leader like Nelson Mandela. Do we have such tall leaders in the dark times of today? I'm afraid I'm rather cynical on that part. When this question of, I just referred to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in many ways it may surprise people if I say that people who were approximately in their 30s or 40s at the time of the exodus, whether they are in the rest of India, bulk of them being in Jammu, nearly 200,000, about 100,000 in the national capital region, in the rest about 30 to 40,000 in the rest of India. Now, all of them have, in a sense, kept in touch. They haven't physically placed themselves in the valley, but they have kept in touch with their friends, with their associates. And in that sense, as I said earlier, the wounds of 1990 had begun to heal. Unfortunately, K-files have reopened those. But I have as a Kashmiri Pandit, I have great faith in maturity and the wisdom of my community, and I'm sure they will not be waylaid, and they will see through that their larger interests in the long term lie with a very deep spiritual connectivity with the valley, and do all that they can so that the soul remains uplifted through a geographic and demographic connectivity with a place with which they are associated for at least 5,000 years of recorded history. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Shabnam.
Thank you so much, Kapil Karji. We have been joined by Dr. Radha Kumarji. Uh, Hello, ma'am. Good evening. Dr. Radha Kumar is an Indian feminist, academic, and author. Her work focuses on ethnic conflicts and peace processes from a strong feminist perspective. In October 2010, Dr. Radha Kumar was appointed as one of the 3 interlocutors for Jammu and Kashmir appointed by the Cabinet Committee on Security of the Central Government of India. Thank you for being here with us, ma'am. Over to you. Please take forward to more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sagar, and I'm honored to be moderating this discussion. Thank you, Shabnam, and my apologies for getting mixed up and joining you a bit late. I see that Kapil has covered almost all the key issues that we had flagged for discussion. Mr. Ashok Pandey has reviewed the Kashmir files. He has written and interviewed quite extensively on this film. Before I hand over to him, I would like to suggest that in the course now of our discussion, we try and go issue by issue so that we can really explore in detail what types of impacts are taking place right now, not only in terms of the film, because obviously the film is part of an ongoing broader narrative with many different elements and inputs here. I think Kapil has highlighted the way in which Kashmiri Pandits, even 30 years after the exodus, are torn by conflicting emotions, opportunities, and sad to say, deep politicization, which has entrenched many already existing communal attitudes. And the problems, therefore, that keep mounting every day in terms of return of Kashmiri Pandits, the possibility of reconciliation for them, and the even larger question of what they used to bring to the culture and what they could bring again. That sense that many Kashmiri Muslims express of a gap, of a loss, a gap, an essential element of the kind of culture that had developed over the centuries that has somehow been disappearing, and the question of how that element too can come back. Now, I would like to first ask Ashok Saab if he would begin by commenting just on the nature of this movie, the type of impact it has had, and the kinds of fears he, or his prognosis, let us say, of the kind of impact that it is having on the actual living conditions, both within the valley and for Kashmiri Pandits who were forced to live in other parts of the country. After that, I would like to go to this issue of political change and reconciliation, and also the quite separate issue of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mr. Pandey, you have, as I said, written a great deal on this. I just wanted to ask you, I've been reading the Legislative Assembly debates of 1990 after the targeted killings had started, and indeed after the first large exodus had taken place in January and February. And I was struck, in fact, to find that two members of the Assembly in particular, Mr. Girdhari Lal Bhargav from Rajasthan, and Mr. V.K. Malhotra, who I think we all know of. So many of the things they said there seem to be almost word for word, not only in this movie, but in the kinds of things that our present government has been saying, including, I was very struck by the fact that they had recommended that anyone even suspected of having sympathy for dissidents, their properties should be taken and they should be arrested. Now, I found this really interesting that here you are, you have a kind of blueprint that these two people are giving out in 1990, and today suddenly, in 2020 and 2022, almost literal phrases from those discussions back then and those views back then are being replicated today. It's as if 30 years of intervening history have been lost almost entirely. That was one kind of point I had to make, but clearly the question of the human suffering that has been so prolonged over this long 32 years is something that has to be the first priority for all of us. So in that context, perhaps you would like to add to what Kapil has said, and then we can come back and talk a little bit more about this question of return, rehabilitation, and so on.
Thank you. I'm really sorry. Some kind of puja is going on, and मुझे नहीं पता कि आप लोगों को मेरी आवाज कितनी सुनाई देगी. मुझे भी काफी कुछ नहीं सुनाई दे रहा. खैर, सबसे पहले मैं इस मूवी पे बात करना चाहूंगा कि ये मूवी कर क्या रही है. बेसिकली इस मूवी का पूरा एम क्या था और ये कर क्या रही है. आप अगर देखोगे इसके पहले कश्मीर पे जितनी भी फिल्में बनी हैं या डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज बनी हैं या जो कुछ भी बना है, जैसे शिकारा ही बनी थी, इट वाज नॉट अ वेरी गुड मूवी बट स्टिल वो खत्म यहाँ से होती है कि जो केपी प्रोटोगोनिस्ट है वो लौट के अपने गांव में आ जाता है, या फिर ऐसी बनी है जहां कम से कम थोड़ी बहस की गुंजाइश है, थोड़ा दोनों तरफ के लोग हैं, शिकवे शिकायत है, बाकी सारी चीजें। ये फिल्म पूरी तरह से, और उसके डायरेक्टर खुद ये कह रहे हैं कि वो एक प्रोपेगेंडा, वो सिर्फ एक फिल्म, he saying that he is not only a filmmaker, he has certain propaganda, he has certain agenda। तो ये फिल्म वो सर्टेन एजेंडा पे बनी हुई है, और पूरी शुरुआत से लेके आखिर तक, और सिर्फ शुरुआत से लेके आखिर तक नहीं, फिल्म बन जाने, उसके रिलीज होने, उसके बाद के इंटरव्यूज और बाकी सारी चीजों से एक चीज बहुत क्लियर है कि जो कपिल साहब ने बहुत डिटेल में बात की रिकंसिलिएशन की, वापस लौटने की और बाकी सारी चीजों की, वो इस फिल्म का कंसर्न नहीं है। मेरे लिए ये इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है कि ये फिल्म, किसी फिल्म का क्या कंसर्न है क्या नहीं है, फिल्में जिस देश में बनती रहती हैं, आती हैं और चली जाती हैं। द प्रॉब्लम इज कि जिस प्रेजेंट डिस्पेंसेशन की बात हो रही थी, जिस सरकार की बात हो रही है, या जो लोग इस फिल्म को प्रमोट कर रहे हैं, जो लोग लगातार इस फिल्म पर बात कर रहे हैं, या ये कह रहे हैं कि 32 साल बाद सच पहली बार सामने आया जैसी बातें कर रहे हैं, उनका भी जो कंसर्न है वो कश्मीरी पंडित्स का रिटर्न या फिर किसी तरह का रिकॉन्सिलिएशन नहीं है। अभी मैम बात कर रही थी कि राधा कुमार जी वहां रही भी है, टीम में गई थी, बहुत सारी जानकारियां उनके पास हैं। वो बात कर रही थी कि किस तरह का रिप्रेशन किया गया, जिसमें जरा सा भी अगर आप रिश्ता रखते हो, जरा सा भी ऐसा लगता है कि डिसेंट कहीं पे है, तो उसको गिरफ्तार कर लिया जाएगा या उसके खिलाफ यूएपीए तक लगाया जा सकता है, वगैरह वगैरह वगैरह। मुझे लगता है कि 90s के बाद से मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम whether declared or undeclared, ये वाली कंडीशंस तो रही हैं वहां पे। जो पूरा का पूरा कंसेप्ट है एएफएसपीए के थ्रू काउंटर करने का, जो पूरा का पूरा कंसेप्ट है रिप्रेशन के थ्रू काउंटर करने का, जो जिसमें कासो किया जाता है, जिसमें बाकी सारी चीजें की जाती हैं, जीप में किसी को बांध के घुमाने जैसी बातें आती हैं, उसमें ये सब कोई नया नहीं है। आप सब लोग, कपिल साहब तो कश्मीरी हैं ही, राधा कुमार जी कश्मीर से बहुत उन्होंने इंटरव्यूज किए हैं, वहां पे गई हैं, उस कमेटी में थी, बहुत कुछ उनको पता है। हम सब जानते हैं कि कश्मीर को कैसे ट्रीट किया गया है 90 के पहले और 90 के बाद कैसे ट्रीट किया गया है। हम सब जानते हैं कि कैसे 90 के पहले हमेशा वहां डेमोक्रेसी को कंट्रोल करने की कोशिश हुई है, कैसे वहां पार्टीज को डेवलप नहीं होने दिया गया, कैसे वहां इलेक्शंस को रिग किया गया, कैसे दिल्ली अपनी कठपुतलियां बिठाती रही वहां पर, ये सारा कुछ हमको पता है। और 90 के बाद आर्मी ने एएफएसपीए के तहत वहां क्या 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 किया है, वो सब कुछ हमें पता है। इन सब के बीच एक बड़ी ट्रेजेडी हुई कि 90 के शुरुआत में कश्मीरी पंडितों को बड़ी मात्रा में वहां से लगभग सारे के सारे ही निकल आए थे, बहुत थोड़े से अभी मैं जानता हूं वहां पर 800 के आसपास कश्मीरी पंडित फैमिलीज बची हुई हैं। काक साहब बात कर रहे थे, जो लोग लौट के 3000 के आसपास लोग गए हुए हैं वहां नौकरियां वगैरह करने के लिए। मेरा एक्सपीरियंस उनके साथ अलग रहा है, मैं कैंप्स में गया हूं, काफी लोगों का इंटरव्यू किया है। मुझे नहीं लगता कि उसको रिटर्न की तरह देखा भी जा सकता है। वो रिटर्न नहीं हुए हैं, ज्यादातर लोग वहां पे नौकरी करने गए हैं और ज्यादातर लोगों का ये कहना था कि कल अगर जम्मू में मेरा ट्रांसफर हो जाए तो मैं जम्मू लौट के आ जाऊंगा। लोकल पॉपुलेशन के साथ, लोकल कल्चर के साथ उनका कोई तालमेल, कोई रिकॉन्सिलिएशन जैसी कोई चीज दिखाई नहीं देती है। दे आर जस्ट देयर फॉर देयर जॉब्स, जॉब करते हैं, सैटरडे संडे को वापस लौट आते हैं, छुट्टियों में वापस लौट आते हैं, जरा सी वहां प्रॉब्लम होती है तो वापस लौट आते हैं। दे आर सेटल्ड इन जम्मू, वो कश्मीर में सेटल नहीं हुए, ट्रांजिट के रूप में वो बने ही थे सारे के सारे। तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि जॉब वाला या ट्रांजिट हाउस बनाकर कोई बड़ा काम किया जा सकता है या कोई बड़े लेवल पे कश्मीरी पंडितों को वापस लाया जा सकता है। उसमें दो चीजें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। कपिल साहब ने एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात कही है, उसको पता नहीं कितने लोगों ने कितने गौर से सुना। उन्होंने कहा कि हमें देखना होगा कि उनका एज स्ट्रक्चर क्या है जो लौटना चाहते हैं। कपिल सर, मैं इसमें एक चीज और जोड़ूंगा कि जो कश्मीर में रह रहे हैं उनका एज स्ट्रक्चर भी हमको देखना पड़ेगा। मैं जब साउथ कश्मीर के गांव से लेके श्रीनगर में तमाम सारे लोगों से मिला, तो कुछ एक इन्फ्लुएंशियल फैमिलीज को छोड़ दें आप, तो उसके अलावा ज्यादातर फैमिलीज की कंडीशन ये है कि बच्चे या तो जम्मू में या दिल्ली में या बाकी जगहों पे पढ़ते हैं, बूढ़े माँ बाप हैं, और कई जगहों पे ये हुआ है कि माँ बाप बूढ़े हैं, दोनों में से किसी की एक की डेथ हो गई है, फिर फादर वहां से चले गए। जैसे हम मान लेंगे कि खेमलता वकलू अभी भी वहां रह रही है, जो एक्स मिनिस्टर थी, बट द ट्रुथ इज कि खेमलता वकलू की पूरी फैमिली जो है आइदर जम्मू में और या फिर बाकी जगहों पे उनके एक लड़के बॉम्बे रहते हैं और बाकी जगहों पे हैं। खेमलता वखलू वहां पे प्रॉपर्टी की देखभाल करती हैं, रहती हैं और कभी भी निकल जाएंगी वहां से। मुझे नहीं लगता कि खेमलता वखलू के निकलने के बाद कोई वो वहां पे रहेंगी। ऐसे ही अलग अलग मेरे पास लगभग 80-85 परिवारों के आंकड़े हैं, तो उनमें से ज्यादातर परिवार ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने बच्चों को बाहर भेज दिया है। द पॉइंट इज, उन्हें कश्मीर में कोई फ्यूचर दिखाई नहीं दे रहा है। उन्हें ऐसा नहीं लग रहा है कि कश्मीर में कोई फ्यूचर होगा, और इस चीज को सिर्फ पंडित मुस्लिम फार्मूले से देखेंगे तो ही मुश्किल आएगी। ओवरऑल जो लोग कश्मीर में रह रहे हैं उनको कश्मीर में कोई फ्यूचर दिखाई नहीं दे रहा है। उसमें कश्मीरी पंडित्स के पास एक ऑप्शन है, ये इसको आप ब्लेसिंग इन डिस्गाइज भी कह सकते हैं। एक ऑप्शन है कि 90s में जो माइग्रेशन हुआ, 90s में जो एक्सोडस हुआ, जो भी वर्ड आप यूज करना चाहें, उसके बाद उनके बहुत सारे रिश्तेदारों ने बाहर के शहरों में, दिल्ली में, जम्मू में, बैंगलोर में, हैदराबाद में और बाकी सारी जगहों पे अपने लिए जिंदगी तलाश ली। एक पूरी पीढ़ी ने जबरदस्त संघर्ष किया, नौकरियों में, बिजनेस में अपना घर बना लिया और सेटल हो गए। तो वो लोग उनके लिए एक सपोर्ट सिस्टम हो सकते हैं बाहर निकलने के लिए। कश्मीरी मुस्लिम की प्रॉब्लम यह है कि चाहे जैसी भी कंडीशन हो, बाकी जगह पे भी जब वो निकल के आता है, अगर वो चाहे कि दिल्ली में बसना, अभी हम लोगों ने देखा कि होटल में उसको रूम मिलने से मना कर दिया गया, तो वो बाकी जगहों पे और दुश्मनाना उसके साथ रवैया है, जिसके चलते वो कश्मीर छोड़ने की बात भी नहीं सोचता है। और अगर इस पूरे माहौल में, अदरवाइज अगर आप देखेंगे तो कश्मीरी मुसलमानों में भी जिनके घर अच्छे बच्चे पढ़ने लिखने वाले हैं, ज्यादातर लोगों ने अपने बच्चों को बाहर पढ़ने के लिए भेजा हुआ है, और इंडिविजुअल बातचीत में कहते हैं कि हम तो चाहते हैं कि ये बाहर कहीं जाके बस जाए, विदेश में बस जाए, कश्मीर लौट के नहीं आए। एक चीज हर आदमी कहता हुआ आपको कश्मीर में मिलता है कि देयर इज नो फ्यूचर इन कश्मीर। अब इस रोशनी में जब हम इस फिल्म को देखते हैं या इस फिल्म के मंसूबों को देखते हैं, या जो सरकार हमारी है जिसकी बात अभी मैम राधा कुमार जी कर रही थी कि जिस तरह की पॉलिसीज अपनाई जा रही है, या जो सारा कुछ उस जमाने में गिरधारी लाल भार्गव या मल्होत्रा के जो बयान थे वो आज सच होते हुए देखे जा रहे हैं, तो बहुत सीधा सा मामला है कि 1947 और उसके बाद से ही आप देखते हैं कि श्यामा प्रसाद मुखर्जी थे अपने जब संविधान सभा में, लेकिन 370 पर उन्होंने कुछ नहीं बोला। शेख अब्दुल्ला ने लैंड रिफॉर्म लागू किया और उसके बाद 370 के बहाने जो मामला उठा, उस समय गांधी की हत्या हुई थी, बहुत बुरा हाल था, पॉलिटिक्स करने के लिए मुद्दा नहीं था। उस जमाने से जो कश्मीर को मुद्दा बनाया गया, वहां से लेके अभी तक आरएसएस का जो पूरा का पूरा कश्मीर को लेके यूज है, वो यही है कि कश्मीर के सहारे बाकी देश में पॉलिटिकल जो मामला है उसको गरमाया जाए, और जिसको हम ध्रुवीकरण कहते हैं, जिसको पोलराइजेशन कहते हैं, उसको जितना ज्यादा संभव हो उतना किया जाए। मैं सेकंड राउंड में और बातें अगर मौका मिलेगा तो मैं करना चाहूंगा, लेकिन अभी मैं इतना कहना चाहूंगा कि इस बात को बहुत साफ साफ समझना चाहिए कि कश्मीरी पंडितों को फिर से वहां बसाने, और फिर से बसाने का मतलब हमेशा ये नहीं होता है कि दिल्ली में किसी का घर है, कोई काम कर रहा है तो सब कुछ छोड़ के जाके वो कश्मीर में रहना शुरू कर देगा। हम लोग खुद अपने घरों से बाहर आके दिल्ली में रहते हैं। फिर से बसाने का मतलब मेरे ख्याल में इतना हो सकता था कि ऐसा माहौल हो जिसमें कम से कम एक जमीन खरीद के अपनी पुरानी जगह पर एक घर बना के गर्मी की छुट्टियों में जा सके, एक नॉस्टैल्जिया को किसी तरह से, वो नॉस्टैल्जिया दोनों तरह की हो सकती है। जो 70+ है उनके लिए लिव्ड नॉस्टैल्जिया हो सकती है, जो 70 से कम के हैं या 90 के बाद पैदा हुए हैं या 90 में 8, 10, 15 बरस के थे, जिन्होंने कश्मीर उस तरह से देखा नहीं हुआ है, उनके लिए वो अलग तरह की सुनी हुई नॉस्टैल्जिया हो सकती है। तो उसको जिंदा करने के लिए, एक सेंस ऑफ बिलोंगिंग को जिंदा करने के लिए कम से कम इतनी जरूरत थी कि कश्मीर में एक ऐसा माहौल बनाया जाता कि थोड़ी वहां पे शांति होती, एक मैन टू मैन जो कांटेक्ट होता है, जो पीपल टू पीपल कांटेक्ट होता है, जो बातचीत का मामला होता है, जिसमें वहां बहुत सारे लोग, कपिल साहब ने भी बताया, और भी बहुत सारे लोग कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि यहाँ से लोग जाएं और वहां के लोगों आपस में बातचीत हो, एक अच्छा माहौल बने। ये सारी चीजों की जरूरत थी। रोजगार वगैरह तो अगले राउंड में बात होगी कि रोजगार वगैरह तो बात की जरूरत है, वो तो है ही, लेकिन पहली जरूरत थी कि कश्मीर में वो माहौल बनता कि वो लौट के आते, और जो उनके हमसाया होंगे, जो उनके पड़ोसी होंगे, उनके साथ वो आराम से रह पाते, भले 3 महीने रहना हो, 4 महीना रहना हो, 6 महीना रहना हो, तब तो जाके कोई माहौल बन पाता उनके लौटने का। बट माय पॉइंट इज कि अगर कश्मीरी पंडित लौटना शुरू कर देंगे, या कश्मीरी पंडित वहां से सेंस ऑफ बिलोंगिंग जो होगी उनकी रियलाइज हो जाएगी, वो वहां पे रहना शुरू कर देंगे, तो आरएसएस का जो पूरा का पूरा प्लान है, वो पूरा का पूरा प्लान चौपट हो जाएगा। उनका फायदा इसी में है कि कश्मीरी पंडित बाहर ही रहें, उनका एक हिस्सा जो अभी भी जगती कैंप में रहता है, जो अभी भी नॉस्टैल्जिक है, जाना चाहता है, वो धीरे धीरे उसकी आवाज को बाहर कर दिया गया, उसकी आवाज कोई सुनता नहीं है। मेन स्ट्रीम में आती नहीं है उसकी आवाज उनकी आती है जिन्होंने ये तय कर लिया है लगभग कि अब हमको कश्मीर लौट के जाना नहीं है, जो पान बन गए हैं इस पूरे गेम में और जिनका यूज किया जाता है लगातार कम्युनलाइजेशन, कम्युनल जो पूरा आपका प्रोपेगेंडा है उसको बढ़ाने का। एक छोटा सा सवाल मैं अक्सर करता हूं जब भी कोई संघी दोस्त या संघी लोग सवाल उठाते हैं मुझसे कि भाई कश्मीरी पंडित 1 या 2 एमएलए तो कम से कम कश्मीर की विधानसभा में हुआ ही करते थे, सारे के सारे यहाँ आ गए उठ के, मैक्सिमम आ गए, अब तो वहां 800 फैमिली है, विधानसभा छोड़ दीजिए, अब तो वो शायद पार्षद भी कहीं जिता ना सके। तो अगर आप इनके इतने बड़े खैर खा थे तो कम से कम इतना तो कर ही सकते थे कि जम्मू की एक विधानसभा से किसी कश्मीरी पंडित को आप जितवा देते, या कम से कम 2 सीटें या 3 सीटें जितना भी उनकी पॉपुलेशन अलाउ करती है वो सीटें जो हैं आप रिजर्व कर देते कश्मीरी पंडितों के लिए। लेकिन ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं किया गया, ना तो कोई पॉलिटिकल रिप्रेजेंटेशन दिया गया उनको, ना उनको वापस ले जाने की कोई कोशिश की गई, और बहुत सीधा मामला है कि ये सारा का सारा तमाशा जो है वो सिर्फ कम्युनल पोलराइजेशन को बढ़ाने के लिए हुआ, और उसी का एक बड़ा जरिया बन रही है ये फिल्म, और उसी उद्देश्य से, उसी पर्पस से इस फिल्म को बनाया गया था। अभी फिलहाल पहले राउंड में मुझे इतनी बात करनी
थी। आपने तो इतने इश्यू रेज किए हैं कि अब मुझे अपने दिमाग को थोड़ा साफ करना पड़ेगा। But there are 2 or 3 points on which I think I would disagree with you. First of all, the whole question, there is no doubt at all that in a situation of ongoing violence, a minority which has been forced to leave is going to find it extremely difficult to come back. There is no question on that. However, we should also take into account the kinds of initiatives that have been taken, some of which have yielded small results perhaps, but still results. And I would say one thing we should never forget. To my mind, what little I know of the Kashmiri Pandit minority, that sense of a Kashmiri culture and of a certain unique Kashmiri identity remains very strong with them. The deepest pain is that exclusion from that identity and that culture. And this is something you see with a lot of minorities who have been forced to flee. I mean, I hope no one will consider it too controversial that I bring a comparison to Palestinian refugees. But I did feel with the Kashmiri Pandits that I met in the Jagti camp that you have referred to, and then in Shekhupura, and in the transit accommodation that was set up around Anhad, that there was a real dilemma. You know, there was, on the one hand, there was a desire, definitely, to at least find the cultural space that had been there, that should come back. And yes, people did go perhaps because they were offered jobs. But my sense was that they were very torn. You know, that they were subjected to a lot of ideological, what can I say, not quite blackmail, because when I went to Anhad, for example, the only people there, along with the Kashmiri Pandits, were some Vishwa Hindu Parishad women. When I asked them that, you know, who has come to visit you, have local communities come to welcome you, how, and so on, they were nervous even to speak. And when they did, they were constantly being buffeted, so that if one of them wanted to say something about somebody coming, actually one of them mentioned that Yasin Malik had come to say, could he do anything to help them feel more, you know, welcomed. But she cut it short because the VHP lady was sitting next to her and clearly not at all pleased to hear this kind of thing. So there was that problem. I found that for whatever reasons, the government, the Kashmir government, too, did not do very much to try to help a process of integration and reconciliation. And I am putting it extremely politely when I say they did not do very much. As interlocutors, we went to them. As I said, I went to all these places, I had conversations, I brought them back to the Kashmir government and to the Union Home Ministry, saying that 1, 2, 3 problems. The Prime Minister's rehabilitation package worked to this extent that there is housing, that people have come, but they are being forced to leave their families behind. Local communities have not been asked to come and welcome them and make them feel that they are really needed there. And there was one point of imagination, I would say, in the Prime Minister's package, which was a recognition that Pandits had constituted the bulk of teachers in the Kashmir Valley. And the idea was to try to at least bring that element back, because all Kashmiris, irrespective of religion, like most Indians, place a very high value on education. And they have always taken their teachers as mentors. And so this was a very, important role. And there was a real opportunity perhaps to make that role expand to what it had been before they were forced out. So those were sort of a few inchoate points I would make, but I think they tie into this whole question that we learned from that experience, that for return to be really meaningful, it really sustained outreach work would need to be done both by the union government and by the state government. That, as I said, was missing in 2010, 11, 12, and I would say almost up to now. There were some civil society initiatives. Kapil has mentioned some. I would also point to the late Shujat Bukhari, who had a very interesting other initiative where he was working with young Kashmiri Pandit entrepreneurs to bring entrepreneurial, not only startups, but also interaction that they, with their experience, could share with people in the valley. And that would be the final point I would make, is that, and it goes to Kapil's point, those initiatives did show what a desire there was for reconciliation. And I would go beyond. I mean, I found, I was extremely moved by the generosity that I saw amongst these young Pandit entrepreneurs who wanted to come back, despite all the horror stories and horror truths that their families or their friends and others had encountered. And we should never downplay both. I have also met Kashmiri Pandits who remained in the valley. A couple of them have been actually elected as panchayat heads in Kulgam, for example, by all their Muslim constituency. There have been Kashmiris Pandits elected to the state assembly, and I am sure that that would happen again if elections were held. In fact, I would imagine that certainly political parties like the National Conference, the PDP, the Communists, other regional parties will go out of their way to try and encourage Pandit candidates to be part of their list. I'm making a promise on their behalf, but I am convinced that they will do it. This is just a prediction, if ever elections are held. In the meantime, I do feel that it would help a lot. And actually, I tried to reach out to the PAGD as well and to others to say, why don't you make an outreach to Kashmiri Pandits about a year ago or so, because it seemed that there could be an opportunity there, and that opportunity was fast narrowing due to the kind of propaganda that was being spread and the policies of, let us say, further division and separation that were being espoused. But I have not seen actually that kind of outreach happening, and that does remain to me a very troubling question, that why is it not happening? Kapil, sorry, if you could take up some
No,
of these.
yeah, I think Ashokji and you, Radha, have made some very, very interesting points, and they provide some guidelines of a kind of futuristic pathway in not just return of Kashmiris, their rehabilitation, and the linked issue of reconciliation. We have seen, I as a child in Kashmir have seen, even before insurgency and before the 90s, I'm talking about the 60s, the 50s, it's a universal phenomenon that people in closed geographies where opportunities are few, Kashmir is such a geography, they tend to pan out. After all, the Nehrus and the Haksars and others, the whole Kashmiris who don't speak the language but are Kashmiris, some left during the days of persecution of Rinchen Shah and later during the Afghan period. But for decades, Kashmiris came out in search of opportunity. And that is visiting us even in the insurgency period. Of course, it's been hastened because of the uncertainty in the valley. So I don't think we should worry too much about their coming out. In terms of return, Ashokji made the point nobody will return. I think I would suggest that there are many. I know of a classmate, and I think Radha, you know Vijay Thar, who set up a school. I was there with him when the first stone was laid at that school, and I was also cynical. What is he doing? Today, he has 5,000 children, and he's so well sought after. So the point you made about education sector, entrepreneurial Kashmiri, and if you have 5,000 children, approximately 5 relatives of children, you have an outreach and linkage bit within the valley of 25,000 people with a school and its family and its principal. Doctors have gone there. There are doctors, I don't want to name them, there are doctors, very well-known doctors in Delhi, who fly every week on a Sunday to Srinagar, come back on a Tuesday and see patients, operate on patients, and diagnose and do the prevention. So likewise, I think the way forward, I stick to my point. We have a success story. We can always do caveating, of course. Oh, the husband is here, but the wife is across. They haven't settled, but they're there. They're there. And I want to make the point, I think that deserves mention here in this webinar, that Kashmiri Pandits' return is not important for the Kashmiri Pandits at all. My theory is good for the Kashmiri Muslims. I remember an old former DG ISI in Pakistan on track 2 mentioning that Pakistanis were very well off intellectually, culturally, and in terms of thought pattern, as long as they were minorities in substance in Pakistan. The moment minorities left, Pakistanis don't know what to do with themselves. What is the point I'm trying to make? You cannot have just one homogeneous culture and religion. There has to be multiple cultures introduced. That lends itself to growth. So I think return of Kashmiri Pandits is important. Don't forget, we are concentrating on Kashmiri Pandits. There are 60,000 today. The largest majority in the valley is not a Kashmiri Pandit, it's a Kashmiri Sikhs. They speak Kashmiri, and they are doing business. They are in profession, and Some of them have come out, some live in Jammu. So it is a dynamic we have to get reconciled to. Yes, the key point Radha made, I couldn't agree with you more. The greatest capabilities of the Kashmiri Pandits were in the education and the health sector. And I think here is where their future lies. Some will be entrepreneurs themselves. I see the stirrings there, perhaps too early to talk, but they believe that initially they may have their feet in Jammu and Srinagar or Delhi and Srinagar, but slowly when the demands of time on their professions are such, they may actually plunk themselves down in the valley. It's going to be a slow process. We should be expecting trickles and not a flood. Why do I say that? A flood can also create political problems. Last point is this business of what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits. I think we are here to seek truth. I said at the outset, you were not here. I was quoting Dante, and I was quoting George Orwell, and I think we have to be seeking truth, and if we seek truth, the Bharatiya Janata Party was of immense help to the Kashmiri Pandits when they did the migration out, because there were reservations made for them in every college, in every technical institution, in states which were governed by BJP. So the Kashmiri Pandits' affiliations in political terms are hugely driven by the fact that when we were in distress, what helped us was the states led by the BJP government. Point one. Point two, linked to that, it helped them in social upward mobility. That if there was a class 4 who migrated out and his child had the chance to become class 3, he now was class 1. In the sense, he moved straight from a clerk to a doctor, whereas there would have been 2 steps in the normal conventional term of social upward mobility. It seems somewhat crude, but I think this needs to be put across because it helped them in the upward mobility. I would also like to suggest, and I think Ashokji may want to make note of it, that Kashmiri Muslims have also moved out. Why are we talking only about Kashmiri Pandits? There are 1 million Kashmiri Muslims in the rest of India. And that is where the K-Files factor is. That today's young people, young parents in Kashmir, my own conversations with them just a few days ago, they're slightly hesitant now to send their children to study in colleges outside because they fear, there may be unjustified fear, but I can't place myself in the mind of the person I'm talking to. They fear that K-Files has created a mahal, the expression used by Ashokji, that my children may come in the harm's way. So there is that hesitation factor. Likewise, it's not just children who are studying, there are business people, there are people in Bollywood, there are people in fashion industry. There is no sector where you do not have people of the majority community of Kashmir and the rest of India. So it is all the more reason that societies keep their eyes open, that no harm comes to, it doesn't matter which community it is, in this atmosphere which has been generated by the film, that no harm comes to people regardless of their faiths. Last point is that of the only true reconciliation, beginnings of it would be Dil Ki Duri or Dilli Ki Duri. Unless we reach out politically to the Kashmiris who are in angst, alienated, who are hate-filled, knowing what they have gone through, I think Ashok made the point. There are menacing restrictions on the media. The Editors Guild of India sent a team to Kashmir. And I think the suggestions that have come from the ground is why can't many media delegations, why can't groups like Radha went earlier, I've been there almost a couple of times every year as part of a concerned citizens group, they provide a certain balm to the people who feel there is nothing ahead that they can look forward to. I think as a society, as a country, and as people, we must do whatever is possible to address. I'm sorry I had said last point, but I'm tempted to say that in last week's visit to Kashmir, there was not one hotel room you could get in Srinagar, not one. 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star. There are 1 million people from the rest of India who are holidaying, and what we talk about, the hatred that the film is talking about, you ask those people. They need to put a film of those tourists, 1 million people who go in summer and who continue to, I mean, there you have to see it to believe what is the number of people who are there in the midst of this huge crisis generated by the film, and they come away not with the impression that the producers and the directors have made of Kashmiris being tyrants, being barbaric, they're being, unyielding, every Kashmiri is a terrorist. That's not the impression that the rest of India, which visits Kashmir, have. So, in a sense, the film will fail because it's not giving you the truth. Because people who have been to Kashmir and seen it last week are not going to believe what this film says. That's the point I want to make.
Thank you, Kapil. I see we're running a bit short of time, so let me invite questions for our two speakers. I'm not quite sure how to ask you to, is there some way you can put up your hands, or I see Shanti, you want to ask a question?
Radha, maybe Ashok wants to respond. We have about 45 minutes.
Okay. So Ashok, would you like to speak?
Just 5 minutes, just 2 or 3 points. First of all, I don't disagree with Radha ji. I don't disagree with Kapil. Whatever they are saying, I agree with that. The problem is, what I wanted to say, जो मैं कहना चाह रहा था वो ये था कि जब तक इस तरह का कम्युनल मामला चलता रहेगा, रिकॉन्सिलिएशन की कोशिशें हैम्पर होती रहेंगी. बिल्कुल ठीक कहा कपिल साहब ने, किस समय सारे होटल्स भरे हुए हैं, सारे, वो मेरा भाई अभी, मेरी भाई उसकी फैमिली और माँ अभी कल कश्मीर से लौटे हैं, एंड उन्होंने एक बुक किया था, जहाँ जैसे वहां पे होता है ट्रिप, उन्होंने बुक किया मना करने के बावजूद, और 3 दिन बाद ही कॉल्ड मी कि यार इट इज टू ओवर क्राउडेड, आई वांट सम, मुझे कोई शांत जगह चाहिए. तो फिर मैंने, उसको डर था थोड़ा कि कश्मीरी लोगों के साथ, मैंने कहा मेरे बहुत सारे दोस्त हैं, वो दे विल हेल्प यू आउट, तो वो थोड़ा सा डर था उसके अंदर कि पता नहीं कैसे लोग होंगे कैसे नहीं. एंड देन आई कनेक्टेड हिम विद फ्यू फ्रेंड्स, और उसके बाद उसका बहुत अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस रहा. 2 दिन अलग अलग तरह की जगहों पे वो लोग सिंथन टॉप वगैरह घूम के आया, और बोला यार पहले मिल गया तो बेहतर होता. प्रॉब्लम ये होती है कपिल साहब की, चूंकि मैं पिछले मुझे लगता है 5 सालों से लगातार हर तीसरे चौथे महीने में कश्मीर जा रहा हूँ, इंटरव्यूज कर रहा हूँ, सब कुछ कर रहा हूँ. जो हमारे टूरिस्ट होते हैं वो ठीक है, वहां पे उनको प्यार व्यार सब कुछ मिलता है, सारा घूम फिर के आते हैं, लेकिन कई बार जैसे होता है ना कि यहाँ का जो जर्नलिस्ट जाता है वो कई बार अपने प्रिंट को या अपने मीडिया को रिप्रेजेंट करने की बजाय गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का रिप्रेजेंटेटिव होकर चला आता है. तो हमारे टूरिस्ट भी ये काम करते हैं. मैं आपको बताऊं कि एक बार अमरनाथ यात्रा के समय में ऐसे ही चला गया कि देखूं क्या होता है, कैसे होता है, एंड आई वाज जस्ट फॉलोइंग दैट यात्रा. और जो बिहेवियर मैंने लोगों का देखा उस यात्रा में, जिस तरह से आप जानते हैं किसी भी पहाड़ी जगह पे आप यूरिनेट नहीं कर सकते हैं कहीं भी खड़े होके, बिकॉज वो पानी पता नहीं कहाँ से पानी पीने के लिए यूज हो रहा हो या किस तरह से यूज हो रहा हो. बट जो नारे लगते हैं, जिस तरह से बात होती है, जो लोग होते हैं जिस तरह से बात करते हैं, मतलब इसको चूंकि यू आर सेइंग कि हमको ट्रुथ बोलना पड़ेगा, तो दिस इज द ट्रुथ कि बहुत सारा जहर भर दिया गया है, दोनों तरफ भरा गया, एक तरफ नहीं दोनों तरफ भरा गया है. इसको पहले मतलब ये जनरलाइजेशन हो जाएगा कि 1 लाख जो लोग गए हुए हैं उनके ऊपर फिल्म का कोई असर नहीं है. दैट इज जनरलाइजेशन. आई एम सॉरी, आई डोंट एक्सेप्ट दैट. दूसरी बात ये है कि जो मैं कहना चाह रहा था बार बार कि जो प्रेजेंट हमारी गवर्नमेंट है, और ये गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, हम सब जानते हैं कि ये एक पॉलिटिकल स्कीम है, पूरी आरएसएस की पूरी पॉलिटिकल स्कीम है, 100 इयर्स की मेहनत है उनकी. वो कभी नहीं चाहेंगे कि कश्मीर के अंदर किसी तरह की शांति हो, कश्मीर में कश्मीरी पंडित वापस लौट के जाएं. और जो गोल्डन पीरियड, हालांकि वो गोल्डन पीरियड नहीं था, कपिल सर वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट 60s में परमेश्वरी हांडू केस हुआ था, एंड परमेश्वरी हांडू केस सब लोग जानते हैं कि कैसे एक्सप्लोड हुआ था, क्या क्या उसमें हुआ था और कितना कम्युनल एंगल उसने लिया हुआ, तो बहुत गोल्डन पीरियड तो कभी नहीं रहा है. जो जॉब्स की बात है, हम जानते हैं 1930 से लेके और उसके बाद कश्मीर में जो पॉलिटिकल लड़ाई दिखती रही है, उसके पीछे जॉब की लड़ाई, रिजर्वेशन और ये सारा कुछ रहा है। ये सब हमको पता है कि ग्लांसी कमीशन आया, उसके बाद क्या हुआ, जॉब्स को लेके कश्मीरी पंडितों का जो बिहेवियर मुस्लिम्स के लिए रहा वो वही रहा जो बाकी देश में सो कॉल्ड सवर्णों का, दलितों के लिए रहा। ये सारी चीजें हम जानते हैं, लेकिन सारे हिंदुस्तान में लोग ऐसे ही साथ साथ रह रहे हैं। पूरे हिंदुस्तान में कोई ऐसी जगह नहीं है जहां सारी कम्युनिटीज गले में हाथ डाल के रोज सुबह भाई भाई का नारा लगाते हुए निकलती हैं। जहां लोग रहते हैं वहां इस तरह के विवाद होते हैं, बट इसमें जो एक्सटर्नल जो लगातार हस्तक्षेप रहा उसने हालात यहाँ बिगाड़ दिए हैं कि कश्मीर में मेरा एक्सपीरियंस कम हो सकता है, लेकिन मैं जिन लोगों से भी मिलता हूँ कोई मुझे फ्यूचर को लेकर बहुत ज्यादा खुश दिखाई नहीं देता है। किसी को ये नहीं लगता है कि बहुत बड़ा फ्यूचर वहां पर है। काम कर रहे हैं वहां पर, मैं जस्ट नाम भूल रहा हूँ, वो जो कश्मीरी पंडित थे जिनका मर्डर कर दिया गया, फिर भी उनकी फैमिली है, उनका मेडिकल का काम है, उनके लड़के ने ट्रस्ट बनाया हुआ है अपने बाबा के नाम पे, और मेरे ख्याल से अभी उनके पास 20 के आसपास एम्बुलेंसेज हैं। शानदार काम कर रहे हैं, उनकी इज्जत भी है, अलग अलग काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन एज अ सोसाइटी जितना टेंशन है वहां पे, जितनी इंसैनिटी है, मतलब कश्मीर में सेन होना भी मुझे लगता है कि एक मुश्किल काम है, खुद को सेन बना के रखना, जितनी इंसैनिटी है उसमें फिर जिस तरह के रिप्रेशन की बात राधा कुमार जी कर रही थी, उस तरह का जब रिप्रेशन भी मिल जाता है तो मैं वहीं से पूछता हूँ कि वो वेलकम करने की कंडीशन में है कहाँ, जब लगातार वही रिप्रेशन हो रहा है, अपने बच्चे को बचा पाना, अपनी फैमिली को, अपने घर को बचा पाना मुश्किल है, तो आप किसी और का वेलकम खुले हाथ से कितना करोगे। कोशिश की गई है श्रीनगर में, कई सारे कश्मीर पंडित, आपको पता है वो एक कश्मीरी पंडित लौटे थे, उनकी दस्तारबंदी की गई थी और वो सारा कुछ, तो वो फोटो आप हो या नहीं भी फोटो आप हो, बट दैट वाज अ वेरी गुड जेस्चर। इलेक्शंस में भी जैसे आशा देवी जहां से इलेक्शन लड़ी थी, अब उनके गांव में सिर्फ 3 कश्मीरी पंडित फैमिली थी और वो पंच बनाया था उनको। तो इस तरह के एग्जाम्पल्स हैं हमारे पास, लेकिन इनको जनरलाइज करके देखना मेरे लिए मुश्किल होता है। मैं जिस तरह से कश्मीर को लगातार पिछले 5 साल से देख रहा हूँ, मुझे लगता है कि बहुत ज्यादा जहर भरा हुआ है, और अगर इस तरह की पॉलिटिक्स लगातार चलती रही तो मुझे कोई सोल्यूशन दिखाई नहीं दे रहा। मैं थोड़ा पेसिमिस्टिक साउंड कर सकता हूँ, लेकिन मुझे फिलहाल कोई सोल्यूशन वहां बड़ा दिखाई दे नहीं रहा। और उसमें इस तरह की फिल्में, और सिर्फ फिल्म नहीं है, व्हाट्सएप है, फिल्में हैं, ये सारा कुछ जिस तरह से लगातार जहर भरा जा रहा है, बहुत मुश्किल कर रहा है। हाँ, पीपल टू पीपल कांटेक्ट का बहुत महत्व है। मैं खुद एक ट्रिप पिछले साल मैंने अरेंज की थी, वो कोविड के चलते कैंसिल हुई। इस साल फिर हम लोग एक ट्रिप मई में लेके जा रहे हैं, उसको कल्चरल ट्रिप का नाम दिया हुआ है, जिसमें हम पंडित से मिलवाएंगे, मुस्लिम से भी मिलवाएंगे, कुछ लीडर से बात कराएंगे, कुछ टूरिस्ट प्लेस पे ले जाएंगे, कुछ आप प्लेसेस पे ले जाएंगे, बट दैट हैज वेरी लिमिटेड स्कोप। जब तक गवर्नमेंट इस तरह की कोई पहल ना करे, आपने बिल्कुल ठीक कहा कि स्टेट और सेंट्रल दोनों जब तक इस तरह की पहल नहीं करें, हमारे जैसे लोगों की कोशिशें बहुत लिमिटेड स्कोप है। तो कई बार पेसिमिस्ट होना भी ठीक होता है, मुझे लगता है आगे के लिए रास्ता बनाना आसान होता है, ओवर ऑप्टिमिज्म भी कई बार परेशान करता है। बस इतनी सी बात करनी थी। थैंक यू।
Thank you. I'm now slightly speechless, but may I suggest that people who have questions to ask could raise their hands? And if you will permit me, all of you, I'd like to have 5 or 7 minutes to summarize and give my own opinions towards the end.
Sure, 100%, sure.
Okay.
So, Kumar Ravi has raised his hand. कुमार जी, आप अपना अनम्यूट करिए और सवाल पूछिए।
Thank you, ma'am, for giving me an opportunity to ask question. Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
मैम, सबसे पहले तो मैं आप सभी के लिए रिगार्ड अपना पे करता हूँ। मेरी उम्र बहुत कम है और मेरा एक्सपीरियंस बहुत कम है आप लोगों से, और मैं किसी भी इस या उस पार्टी का नहीं हूँ, नहीं मेरा कोई रिलेशन किसी भी पार्टी से है, किसी पक्ष से है। लेकिन मुझे क्या फील हुआ है, एक सिंपल स्टूडेंट के रूप में मैंने जो कुछ भी पढ़ा लिखा है, जाना है कश्मीर के बारे में, हमेशा से स्टोरी वन साइडेड चलती रही है, चाहे वो उस तरफ से रही हो या आज की तारीख में इस तरफ से है। और जब तक हम में से कोई भी एक पक्ष बनकर बात करेगा, हम इसके एक एमिकेबल सॉल्यूशन पर कभी भी नहीं पहुंच पाएंगे। ये इस दुर्भाग्य रहा है कश्मीरियों का, या आप कह लीजिए कि दुर्भाग्य रहा है पूरे भारत का। या तो हम एक पार्टी बन जाते हैं या उसके अगेंस्ट में रिटेलिएशन में दूसरी पार्टी बन जाते हैं, और हम में से कोई भी आदमी ये नहीं सोच पाता है कि अगर हम एक तरफा बात करेंगे तो अगला पक्ष हमारी बात क्यों मानेगा। मुझे इस बात से लेकर बहुत तकलीफ है और दुख है कि मेरे देश की जितनी भी गूढ़ समस्याएं हैं वो केवल कुछ लोगों की पार्टीबाजी के कारण कभी भी सॉल्यूशन की तरफ नहीं बढ़ पाती हैं। मेरा केवल इतना एक दर्द और तकलीफ मुझे आपसे कहना था। बाकी मैंने आपको भी फॉलो किया है जब आप वार्ताकार थी कश्मीर में, कश्मीर के मामलों को लेकर, जब डॉक्टर मनमोहन सिंह के समय में मैंने आपको भी बहुत क्लोजली उस वक्त फॉलो किया था कि आप क्या कर रही थी, और बाकी लोग जिन्होंने भी कोशिश की है इस तरफ से चाहे उस तरफ से। मेरी
कुमार जी,
एकमात्र
हमारे पास समय थोड़ा कम है, अगर आपके पास कोई सवाल है तो आप पूछ लीजिए
Coming
प्लीज।
to it.
मैं एक
Okay.
रिक्वेस्ट ये करना चाहूंगा कि आप लोग जो लोग भी हैं आज की इस मीटिंग के ऑर्गेनाइजर्स, आप में से सभी लोग किसी न किसी रूप से कश्मीर के मुद्दे से जुड़े रहे हैं। मेरा एक रिक्वेस्ट है, उसको आप सवाल ना समझें, रिक्वेस्ट है कि एक एमिकेबल सॉल्यूशन अगर हमको चाहिए तो हमें किसी न किसी पार्टी का खूंटा छोड़ना पड़ेगा। एक बिल्कुल ही स्वस्थ नजरिए से इम्पार्शियल होकर अपनी बात रखनी पड़ेगी। बस मैं एक आम नागरिक हूँ, किसी पार्टी संबंध नहीं हूँ, मेरी एक ये दर्द है जो मैंने आप तक पहुंचाया है, और अगर कहीं से हर्ट मैंने किया हो किसी को भी तो मैं बहुत तहे दिल से उससे माफी चाहता हूँ, माजरत चाहता हूँ। थैंक यू वेरी मच मैम, वंस अगेन।
Thank you.
मैं इस पर 1 मिनट में एक बात रखना चाहूंगा। असल में ऐसे आके आरोप लगा के चल देना दुनिया का सबसे आसान काम है। आपने कहा है, सब पढ़ा है आपने, जितना कुछ हस्तक्षेप उस पर किया गया और सब आपको एक तरफा लगा। राधा कुमार की एक किताब है, पता नहीं आपने पढ़ा है कि नहीं पढ़ा है, वो इंटरलोकुटर होते समय उन्होंने नहीं लिखी थी, काफी बाद में, मेरे ख्याल 2 साल पहले आपकी किताब आई थी। मैं अपनी किताब का नाम नहीं लूंगा क्योंकि अपनी किताब का नाम लेना हमेशा गलत होता है। आपको पढ़ के बताइए कि वो किसके पक्ष से लिखी गई है, और आप अगर कहेंगे तो मैं ऐसी 50 किताबों का नाम एक के बाद बता दूंगा जो किसी के पक्ष से नहीं लिखी गई है। दरअसल होता क्या है कि आप जब आप 20 बार कह रहे होते हैं मैं किसी पार्टी का नहीं हूं, तो आपका एक पक्ष होता है बेसिकली, जिस पक्ष को आप छुपाना चाहते हैं, और जब उस पक्ष की बात होती है तो वो आपको निष्पक्ष लगती है। दुनिया में कुछ निष्पक्ष नहीं होता है। मेरे घर के पास इतनी जोर से माइक बज रहा है, और ये पिछले 3 दिन से बज रहा है, और 4 दिन तक और बजेगा पूरे दिन। मैंने नौकरी से रिटायरमेंट लिया है लिखने पढ़ने के लिए। मैं 3 दिन से कुछ लिख पढ़ नहीं पाया हूँ, और 4 दिन तक कुछ पढ़ नहीं पाऊंगा। अब अगर मैं इसको कहता हूँ, आप कह सकते हैं कि अरे भाई ये तो भजन के खिलाफ आप बात कर रहे हो। ये चूंकि आपको भजन अच्छा लगता है तो आप कह सकते हो कि इसके खिलाफ बात कर रहे हो, या आपको एक पक्षी लग सकता है। तो एक पक्षीय कुछ होता नहीं। पहली बात तो एक पक्षी जैसी बात नहीं हुई है। इस बात को अगर आप स्वीकार करेंगे कि कश्मीर इज अ हिस्टोरिकल प्रॉब्लम, तो कोई भी कश्मीर पे बात करेगा तो उस हिस्टोरिकल प्रॉब्लम को डिस्कस करेगा। उसमें वो कभी किसी के साथ आपको लगेगा, कभी किसी के साथ लगेगा। उसको अगर आप ऐसे लोगों की ये एक पक्ष में है तो कई बार ये आपकी अपनी प्रॉब्लम हो सकती है। मैं आपसे अनुरोध करूंगा, हम सब भारत के नागरिक हैं, हम सब, मुझे नहीं लगता कि राधा कुमार किसी पार्टी की मेंबर है, मुझे नहीं लगता कपिल काक किसी पार्टी के मेंबर है। मैं तो खैर किसी पार्टी का मेंबर 6 महीने पहले तक मैं सरकारी नौकरी में था, तो मैं हो ही नहीं सकता था, और अभी भी मैं किसी पार्टी का मेंबर नहीं। तो हम सब
आपकी पार्टी को ज्वाइन करेंगे।
हम सब पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं। थोड़ा बहुत हम लोगों की गलती बस इतनी है कि हम लोगों ने शायद थोड़ा बहुत कश्मीर का इतिहास और बाकी सब पढ़ लिया है, तो हम जब बोलते हैं तो उसके पीछे बहुत सारी चीजें आती हैं। अब उसमें आप कोई पक्ष ढूंढ लें, ये कई बार आपकी भी प्रॉब्लम होती है। बस इतना ही।
With permission of the organizers, I'm not going to allow you, Ravi Sahab, to reply yet, because there are many other people who want to speak, and I don't want this to become a kind of two-people conversation. But certainly towards the end, अगर आप फिर आना चाहें कुछ कहने, तो हम और लोग ना हो जो कहना चाहें, तो मैं जरूर आपको मौका दूंगी। अच्छा, अब मेरे पास हैं दो लोग, पर साथ साथ मैं, शबनम, if it's okay, I'd like to now have 2 or 3 questions at the same time, questions, comments, whatever you like, so that we can save a bit of time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. May I ask Dhanpal Solanki and then Brunel D'Souza? Mr. Solanki?
Good evening. Ma'am, I'm way away in Rajasthan, from Badmer district, close to Indo-Pak border. I've come for a Jain Tirth here. My question is very simple. I mean, I appreciate Shabnam ma'am's gesture to take up such important issues. And my question is very simple. You know, I am a minority rights activist in my own right and a lawyer. But when can we have a condition where there is peace, amity, and trust and confidence among the Hindu minorities in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, so that they can go back and stay with their Muslim brothers and sisters and all other community? Ye kab hoga? I mean, you've done fantastic work. I mean, many of us do it, but when are we going to have this humanity raised up? Oh, my only, if in my lifetime, if I can see that, Bhagwan, Allah, jo bhi hai, if that happens, wonderful. I'm way back in Rajasthan. You can see this. It's a beautiful Jain temple, Nakoda, Jain Tirth. So I'm there. So anybody could take up that question. And thank you.
Thank you. Brunel?
No, I mean, it's been wonderful listening to all of you. And, I have also been with Shabnam and Anirudh Kala and Revati Lal to Kashmir as part of a fact-finding after 370 was abrogated. I just want to ask, Radha and Kapil Kak and also Mr. Pandey, why haven't we, as a country invested enough on truth, healing and reconciliation as part of our, political process? Of course, Kapil spoke about South Africa and the truth and reconciliation work, but I think, I feel that, following partition also, we haven't really done enough in these areas, and today in many ways we are paying a price for many other factors that contribute to very complex political and social problems. But why do you think there is no sincere effort? Rather, you were also talking about that the Kashmiri government perhaps didn't do enough. So why is this entire process of truth, healing and reconciliation not part of a very conscious political strategy?
Well, if I may start, Kapil and Ashok, and then I'll hand over to you. Brina, I think one of the problems that we're facing over here is that we are speaking in the context of ongoing violence, even though that what our government calls terrorist activities are somewhat suppressed at the moment. The risk of them constantly coming back again is very high. We know just in the last year that not only was the Pandit chemist who Ashok was mentioning shot, several Pandit Panchayat candidates who had won, they were shot too. One or two Pandits who had tried to return, they were shot too. So this is a situation of really violence, and it is very difficult, quite frankly, to control violence unless you have a peace process, and we have not had a peace process now since 2010-11. So we're talking about a 10-year lack of a peace process, which only hardens and entrenches hostilities. And therefore, in terms of the question that Dhanpalji asked, we have a problem there too, because we do not see an end to this situation. And until we can see some end to the situation, it is very difficult to talk about truth, reconciliation, humanity. Now, the larger question of humanity, this is a hugely unequal society. A level of brutalism towards life has been evident in our society for a very long time indeed. I would say that if you want to put it, as Ashok very rightly said, within a historical context, then actually I think that post-independence, elements of humanism did return. We did have a democracy in which there was concern. It is true that they never went to the extent that they should have. We have seen, of course, communal riot after communal riot. We have seen communal attack after communal attack. In hardly any of them, if any, I cannot say that a single one that I have looked at has ever resulted in justice, let alone reconciliation. Now, you know, the concept of reconciliation and the concept, these are two quite different things. By the way, truth and reconciliation could happen in South Africa because of Desmond Tutu, and because you have a very great tradition, religious tradition of trying to forgive. That people like Desmond Tutu made positive in his country amongst people. Well, we all know what the horrors of apartheid were, worse than anything perhaps that any government in our country has done. And yet they were able to rise above and find a way. It was very, very painful. I don't know how far it went. And there were many people who felt that the sacrifice of justice, that the Reconciliation Commission did not compensate for the sacrifice of justice. Nevertheless, what was so extraordinary and visionary about that initiative was that victims and perpetrators came together in a forum to confess, to forgive, or not to forgive, but at least to hear each other, at least to talk about remorse. You know, this is one of the biggest problems, that hardly anybody in our country feels able to express remorse, and indeed, especially our political leadership failed to. Now, clearly we are in a terrible phase in our country today. We have seen the rise of autocratic behavior. We have seen the caving of institutions which should not have caved. And we have seen, as a result of that, a level of public passivity that makes it very difficult for most of us to do anything but share the deep despair that Ashok has expressed. But we do have to pull ourselves together. We do have to find ways out. And right now, we are talking about Kashmiri Pandits in particular, because this discussion was framed around the Kashmir files. And I would say that though this is only a discussion, we will at least try to do a little justice in this discussion by focusing on Pandits and what is required for them. I think that the very important point that has been made by both Kapil and Ashok, which is that this film and the kind of support it has received from government, indeed it's even made it into debates in the Rajya Sabha, that this film has made the polarization and the entrenched communal sentiments on every side of the divide just that much worse. And to that extent, it is completely unhelpful. On the other hand, remember also one other thing, that many Kashmiri Pandits are not necessarily in one political ideology, who may actually be people who don't even recognize ideology, as many in our country don't. Many of them do feel that this film has somehow reflected their pain. So I would say there needs to be a further question perhaps for us, not about this film, because I think most people in this gathering would agree that this film is, really, well, not too much time should be spent on discussing it, let us put it that way, and that it has had a dangerous impact. Having said that, we have to think the other side around. Well, if this film has had such a dangerous impact, what are the means whereby at least the pain of people who have had to live as refugees for 30 years on one side, and on the other, the recognition that we have a part of our country which suffers such great repression. It ought to be intolerable, the repression. So now if you're talking a situation of such repression and you're talking a deeply wounded community, how do you bring those two together? that is something that we should be thinking about. And if we know any filmmakers who could perhaps consider even filming conversations between Pandits, Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims, and putting that out in the public sphere, perhaps that could help at least a little bit to show that it is not that anyone is being callous to the other. That is the most important message, I would think, that requires to be sent out by gatherings like this, that we recognize the pain and suffering, and that we believe that there are actually ways in which you can mitigate that pain and suffering, and that there are ways in which people can converse with each other. And it is in that context that I think the civil society initiatives that Kapil has touched upon, or that I saw a few of, and certainly the Kashmiri doctor, the Pandit doctors who are going and treating people in the valley. These are really important initiatives that we need to talk up. We need to give them the respect and the space that they deserve. And if we don't do it, who will? So on that note, shall I turn first to Ashok and then to Kapil, or Kapil, do you want to go first?
Ashok has disconnected, so
Oh, okay.
I'll just call him while we can start with
Kapil? He's muted. Kapil, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I think the host was kind enough to mute me. So I think, Kumar Ravi was talking about solutions. Are we looking at some solutions? Some of you who haven't been involved in it may be interested to know that the golden period in looking at a solution to Kashmir, and this was also, in a sense, answers Kumar Ravi's question about one-sided. No, it's not one-sided. There were two dispensations in Delhi from 1999 to 2014, and in that long period, during Vajpayee's time in 2003 to 2007, and until 2004, and then 2004, Mr. Manmohan Singh, there was a two-sided, not one-sided, a consensus approach to resolution of the Kashmir issue, including that of reaching out to the Pakistanis, and this was a grand success. On 17th of March, when in the India's Prime Minister's representative Sati Lamba handed over to Riaz Khan, who was President Musharraf's representative, a non-paper on Kashmir. And this is on record, I can be quoted, that Riaz Khan saying that 90% agreement was there between the Indian and Pakistani leadership, topmost levels, on the resolution of J&K. I don't need to go into details on that, but we have a formula, we have a kind of a draft, and we can move forward. And this would, in many senses, address both the issue of Kashmir as also our problem-ridden relations with Pakistan. Brunel made a very good point, and of course that's been largely answered by Radha. I don't want to repeat there, but we are against the sentiment of truth and reconciliation. The dominant narrative today, I don't need to explain, is falsehood and brutalization. Now, there is a collision between the desire and the policy. And unfortunately, we don't see much hope there, because I mentioned earlier about the menacing type of restrictions which are placed on media in Kashmir. Today, as we talk, right to assemble, right to meet, right to dissent. Newspapers are not addressing any political issues at all. When will that be allowed? And surveillance, invisible surveillance on a massive scale. So this generates its own fears. So I'm afraid we are far from truth and reconciliation. Let us to begin with, take the toxicity out of the system and see if we can move forward. I was also told, on the film, I don't want to discuss the film, as Radha rightly said, but there are things it has generated which need to be discussed. We were asked by a dozen Kashmiris in the valley, as also in Jammu by section, why is it that the top leadership of this country is endorsing the film, recommending that it be seen? Resident welfare associations are giving passes, free tickets to their welfare residents in their societies. Where is this money coming from? Who are these magnanimous people who want people to see on a large scale this film and finance the watching of that film? I think these are questions which will need to be addressed. On Dharmpal Solankiji's point, I want to reassure you with fairly decent experience at ground zero. While there are fears generated by the film, there are fears generated by the recent killings of that medical shop owner and the Sikh lady principal and the Hindu teacher. Yes, they do create a certain uncertainty and kind of fragility. But the Kashmiri minorities in the valley are living very happily. The impression you gave that they are tension filled? No, not at all. Likewise in Jammu, and here again we talk to people on the ground in Jammu, that the minorities there are the Muslims. So the complexity is of a different kind. But here again, thanks to the business and commercial driven larger interests of the communities both in Jammu and in Kashmir, they feel the people minority in Jammu region, except in the Chenab Valley and the Punch and Rajouri Valley hills, where there are different issues, but there is no danger. There is no perceived apprehension of the balloon going up or bombs falling out of the skies. That is indeed not the case. But I want to end this again on the solutions oriented. Let me suggest, at the risk of being termed naive, a very simplistic solution to settlement. A socio-economic and demographic profiling of the Kashmiri Pandits who are registered. They are all registered with the authorities both in Jammu and Kashmir, to which document the central government accesses to evolve policy. My suggestion is fix an amount. Person X from this socio-economic strata and living in so-and-so area in Srinagar can be given this amount and say, here is that amount, buy property, whether you live there or you treat it as a second home, you will see more and more non-job oriented footprints in the valley. That is our intention. More must go back. Likewise, if somebody was living in Rajbagh in a 2 crore property and that property got either distress sold or got occupied or problems occurred, to that gentleman who's registered, give him that amount which will fetch him in Rajbagh. That all he has to do, consider the suggestion from this webinar. All he has to do, he or she has to do, is to register the property, provide the registration, provide the sales deal, provide the transfer to that individual of that property on the basis of which that amount would have been pre-transferred to that individual. I think this is a kind of a non-formal approach to seeing the presence of the Kashmiris enhanced in the valley.
You are mute, Radha.
Is Ashok back?
No, he is unable to join. Some technical issue. Would you like to quickly take the 5 questions? People have raised hands.
Oh, of course.
Just take all 5 of them and then,
Sure, yes, please. I don't see the hands.
There is Basuvi Kirvio, there's Dimple Banchu, there is Imtiaz, and there's Jai Mishra.
And Manan Kumar.
And Manan. Okay, so Can we go in that order, please?
And short questions because Kapil Kak has to leave.
Okay, so should we start with Dimple Wanchu? I see your hand up.
Yeah. Please.
Hello, very good evening to all of you. I have a very quick question. I watched Kashmir Files today. As a matter of fact, I have 3 very quick questions, if I should be allowed to ask those. Please stop me whenever you want to. The first one, the topmost question that I have is, so after, as I was watching Kashmir Files, I was crying, and it was heartbreaking, even though I'm fully aware of what's going on politically, but how emotions were anchored to statements that were being made. It was very clear the message that was being conveyed. So, and there were no trigger warnings. Anyone who sees somebody being shot up close is going to feel all of that. So I was wondering, and what else came through was, the slogan of Azadi and the song Hum Dekhenge, and which I participated in myself, and I know I've participated in protests where we say Azadi from Bhukmari, Azadi from whatever, beggary and poverty and all of that. And I fully understand all of this, and I watched this film today just so I could, going forward, interview somebody and also, of course, be part of this conversation for a better understanding. And even so, I came back with a reflection, which I wanted to share here and ask a question about it, was that perhaps negotiating at the level of policy making we need to step back from it, and negotiating at the level of tactical negotiations in terms of the language we use, because Azadi clearly is, as they portray, only Genuites, making that slogan, calling that slogan out during protests, which is not true, which a lot of us who are not affiliated to other universities would like to participate in that as well, call out. But perhaps we could take a step back, and especially because of the response that this film has got, we could take, just as a part of negotiation, I wish we had more time, I could say it's like a neighborhood conflict that we have at this place. Boys want to play in the park till 9 o'clock. I just went out and I'm supportive of them, but they now have a new football playing field. They don't want to go there for whatever reasons. And so I just tell them, can you just step back, say 15 minutes, leave the seat. So
Sorry. Can we please?
Yeah, sure.
Can we please request you to ask a question, because we are running
the question
late,
is,
and there are 4 other people.
Yeah, the question is, can we sort of step back as a society after watching this film at the level of linguistics that we use, without feeling that our freedom of speech has been taken away or whatever. I'm just thinking out loud if that's a good idea. That was just the first 2 of my questions. The third one is I forget. So, but please, I'll be very happy if I can just hear answer. The second one is, sorry, if I may just bring this in. Can independent entrepreneurs, what is the way of independent entrepreneurs entering that society back, whether they're Kashmiris or non-Kashmiris? What is the best non-intrusive way in which they can approach people? Is there any vehicle for that?
Shall we quickly go through the other questions? I do have one.
Vasvi.
Please, Vasvi.
But very quickly, please. Vasvi, unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have heard a lot about Kashmir, these files, but I did not see this movie and I don't want to see. मेरा जो सवाल है वो ये कि कश्मीरी पंडित को लेकर इस तरीके से जो ह्यूमैनिटी है सोनी सूरी एंड बस्तर में जो हो रहा है इतने ट्रायल के मारा जाता है तो फिल्म बनाने वाले इन सब मुद्दों पे फिल्म बना के और इतना ह्यू क्राई क्यों नहीं होता ये मेरा सवाल है आदिवासी भी इस देश के नागरिक हैं और कश्मीरी पंडित पॉपुलेशन कितनी है हमारी पॉपुलेशन 15 to 20 करोड़ है और जिस तरह से मारा जा रहा है 514 ट्राइबल्स इनोसेंट अभी झारखंड के जेलों में है जो माओवादी कहीं से नहीं है इसकी कीमत फादर को चुकानी पड़ी उन्होंने ये मुद्दे उठाए तो सवाल ये है कि ये मुद्दे मेन स्ट्रीमिंग क्यों नहीं हो पाते हमारे मुद्दे मेन स्ट्रीमिंग क्यों नहीं हो पाते
शुक्रिया आपका सवाल सुन लिया इम्तियाज साहब आप अपना सवाल पूछिए अनम्यूट कीजिए अपने को
Thank you for allowing me to raise the question. I'm Imtiaz from Chicago. I believe, or we believe here, that this film, Kashmir Files, is essentially a propaganda film to advance the Hindutva agenda in India, to marginalize Muslims all over India. And there is other efforts are going on. They say that they need to establish Hindu genocide museums throughout India to emphasize what the Muslims did to Hindus over ages or centuries. This is essentially a political situation, and we need to think of how best to deal with it. The resources on the side of civil society are minuscule in comparison to the resources which BJP and Hindutva has in India. So this is a pretty much very one-sided struggle or contest. Thank you.
Thank you. Manan Kumar, आप सवाल पूछिए. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. You know, don't you, my question is that don't you think that the first step to reconciliation has to happen, you know, when the return of the statehood and then restoration of Article 370 and then a fair and free election, not the kind of 1987. And everything else, including the return of KPs, can happen only after that. Anything considered, you know, related to reconciliation can happen after that. What are your views?
Thank you. Mahabala Yadur, and this is the last question. So, बाकी लोग हाथ ना उठाएं अपना. Mahabala Yadur, please unmute yourself. Hello, are you there, Mahabala? No, we are not. Yeah, please. We are not taking any other question after this. There's no time. Ji. Mahabala, are you asking your question? I think disconnect ho gayi wo. Please. Over to you, Radha and Kapil.
Oh, Kapil, would you like to?
Yeah, I think I have to go because I have another program in just 7 minutes. Yeah. I think in a way, I'm glad the questions were very brief. Firstly, Dimple Vanchu. If you have cried and you're a Vanchu, you're a Kashmiri Pandit, I fully understand. I would cry too. That is the part that deals with Kashmiri Pandit exodus. Very painful, huge grief. And what is worse, the feeling of being, you know, virtually kicked out from your home by your own self out of fear. So on that, there is no doubt. But the second part is where Imtiaz Saab is on dot. There is a larger agenda, and the people associated with film are well known. And I think, as I said earlier, Arvind Kejriwal's suggestion that out of 250 crores, if only 125 crores are given to Kashmiri Pandits to settle them back in Kashmir, give a free gift of a home, we would have done a bit. So agenda, I have, you know, very recent 1 week old experience of talking to dozens of people in Kashmir. Their only question is, there was no endorsement by the top leadership in the country asking people to go and watch this film and learn about country. But no such recommendation was made when the film was made on Gulberg happening. No such recommendation was made when Rana Ayub wrote that beautiful book, Gujarat Files, which was banned. So in a sense, we are seeing some impulses. I don't want to name organizations, not worth it. On Manan Kumar's point about fair elections, rest assured, one good thing that has happened to Kashmir is to begin with in 1996, very gingerly, restoration of free and fair elections started. But from 2002 onwards till date, virtually 2 decades, and we'll have possibly elections in October, they are perfect as they are anywhere in India. So elections is not a problem. As to Article 370 restoration, I am myself a petitioner with Radha and many of us others. It's a very slow coach, and how that will move, I'm not quite sure. But I think reaching out, restoration of statehood are 2 immediate steps that can be taken to evolve a kind of a balm for across the Banihal, minorities in Jammu and the minorities in Kashmir, as also the principal majority in Kashmir, because people have to move on. And this is perhaps the time, after 2 decades of horrible grief and horrible tragedy, then one can see some peace in Kashmir. And I also believe, in my conversations on the second track with Pakistanis only 2 weeks ago, in a third country, we can't talk to each other in India or in Pakistan, that it is quite possible that the leadership there, despite the pressures Imran Khan is on now, are quite willing to move forward on restoration of some kind of normalcy in relations between India and Pakistan. And there is also an evolving consensus that Pakistan is not, under any circumstances, insistent on restoration of Article 370 as a prerequisite for any talks they have with India. I'd like to thank Shabnam and of course Radha, Chair, and our participants for giving me this opportunity to be with you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kapil. I have very little to add to that. I do wish that Ashok was here to hear his last words, but unfortunately, he has been called away. 2 points. The lady who asked about Adivasi and why so little attention. मैं आपके साथ बिल्कुल सहमत हूँ, आप सही कह रहे हैं। और खैर हमारे हाथ में तो ये नहीं है कि हम सिनेमा वालों से कहें कि आप फिल्म बनाइए इस पे, पर हमारे हाथ में इतना तो है कि हम अखबारों में पूछ सकते हैं कि वो क्यों इतना कम क्यों छापते हैं और क्यों नहीं छापा जाता है। जो भी हम सब लोगों के हाथ में है वो तो हमें करना चाहिए। तो शुक्रिया कि आपने ये पॉइंट हमारे सामने रखा। और I am absolutely confident that all the people who are attending this will of course try whatever they can to make sure that we have better information on the situations that people, that both our Adivasi population, our Dalit population, and of course our religious minorities who are facing huge attacks. We need to focus on this. We need to think about how to look after this situation, and how can we at least persuade some of the members of parliament that these are issues that you have to raise again and again and again and again in the House. Having said that, now I should simply say thank you to Shabnam, to Anhad, for giving us this opportunity to talk. It seems to me that 3 points have emerged very clearly. One, that it is an absolutely unalterable right of Kashmiri Pandits to return. It is not for us to decide under what conditions that will happen. If you don't mind my saying this, those who feel that they want to go back right now, they should have the freedom to do so. But they should also know that how volatile and risky that return would be. And we should also be absolutely clear that neither this government nor any government is going to provide the kind of security that is required. That is one point I would say we must all take on board very carefully, that when we ask for security, be very clear, what does that entail? How many people, what resources? You know that one of the big problems with the panchayat elections that this government, our government, insisted on holding was that in this situation of insecurity, they might very well be targeted. And as you also know, they have been targeted. And you should be aware that if you want to provide security for 33,000 people, which are the panchayat elected representatives, what is the kind of numbers that you're looking at? You're looking at what? At least 10 per person. And that's only people you're talking about, security guards, because you have to rotate them. They too are human beings. They should have leave. They should be able to sleep and so on and so forth. Then what about the, the transport? Then, I don't know, guns, bulletproof vests, this, that, the other. It's a huge enterprise. So let us be very clear that first and foremost, we never even educate our people on what is a dangerous situation. Look at what happened to our students in Ukraine, for God's sake. Let's be clear that that is something that is absolutely a responsibility of a government. Provision of security may not be so easy for them to do, but certainly being clear and about risk is something important. I believe that it was very wrong of Governor Jagmohan at that point to say suddenly to Kashmiri Pandits, you should return. I believe it is wrong of the Lieutenant Governor now to say to Kashmiri Pandits, you should return. I do agree with Kapil that at least give them the resources that if they feel that they want to come or they want to buy a house or in compensation for the property that they lost, that right, that freedom they must have. But do not give false expectations to people. That should be our bottom line at the very least. Shabnam, perhaps one of you from Anhad would like to just say a last closing word?
Yeah, Tarun would do that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Radha Kumar, for moderating this session. I would also like to thank Mr. Kapil and Ashok Kumar Pandeyji for being here and taking all the questions positively and replying to them. We know the situation is very hard for all of us, but we are trying to be here. We are trying to be here for the Kashmiri Pandits also. Thank you so much for the technical team of Anhad and to all the members who are present here and all the participants who are participating in this webinar. Thank you so much. Also, those who have missed this webinar, they can go to Anhad India's YouTube page. They can see this video there. And yeah, you can also subscribe to our YouTube and Facebook channels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Radha Kumar.
My pleasure. Well, I shouldn't say pleasure, but it was a great discussion.
Indeed.
So if anybody wants to leave their email IDs and WhatsApp numbers, you're welcome to do that in the chat. So I'm closing the meeting now. I think everyone who wanted to put their numbers, they have. Thank you very much again.